Welcome back to the Batcave. As always, please make sure you're liking and subscribing to Larry's Batcave. Hope all is well with everybody. Last week on Monday, September 13th, marked the 30th anniversary of the film Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. This film was intended to be the final installment of the Nightmare on Elm Street series. It premiered on September 13th, 1991, and it was intended to be a film designed to officially kill the character Freddy Krueger. However, in further years, there have been supplemental films to the series, including Wes Craven's New Nightmare, the crossover of Freddy vs. Jason, and the 2010 reboot. So just to give you a little background on the Nightmare on Elm Street series. The original film was developed by writer and director Wes Craven, and it introduced audiences in 1984 to the serial killer Fred Krueger. The original backstory of Freddy Krueger was that he was this child killer that was burned to death by the parents of his victims. However, he did not die and instead returns to haunt and kill the children of the parents that burned him alive. The first Nightmare on Elm Street premiered in November of 1984, and it developed into a successful film franchise for the studio New Line Cinema that eventually became coined or nicknamed the house that Freddy built, because from 1984 to 1991, and then of course with the Wes Craven New Nightmare in 94, the franchise was able to finance all the studio's other projects. New Line Cinema, for those that are not aware, would eventually go on to produce and develop in film series including the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle films, and then of course The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. In 1991, after 5 successful films with the Nightmare on Elm Street series, New Line Cinema under Bob Shaye decided to create a new story where Freddy Krueger would be killed once and for all. They just figured out, well, why don't we just kill him off and let it be that? So, the story itself of Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare takes place in 1999, even though the film came out in 1991. Basically, Freddy has killed all the children of the town of Springwood except one, which is known as John Doe. And what he does is he sends John Doe out into the world to locate his unmentioned child, Freddy's unmentioned child, who can free him from the confinements of Springwood so he can go after new victims. We're introduced to the social worker Maggie, who is played by Lisa Zane, and Doc, who's portrayed by Yaphet Kotto. In the process, we also are introduced to 3 teens who are living at the local children's shelter, including Carlos, who is seen as being hearing impaired, Spencer, who is this rich teenager, who's obsessed with video games, and Tracy, who actually is a victim of sexual assault from her father. The reason why I'm highlighting all these aspects of these 3 teens is because throughout the film, those aspects are emphasized and used by Freddy when he goes after those 3 teens. So throughout the film, Maggie tries to help this John Doe character remember who he is, and together with Carlos, Spencer, and Tracy, they go back to visit Springwood in hope of it triggering John Doe's memory because he has amnesia. So in the process of visiting Springwood, Carlos, Spencer, and Tracy get lost and find themselves eventually in the abandoned Elm Street house, while Maggie and John Doe learn that Freddy has had a child that was taken away from him and put into the town orphanage. Eventually, Carlos and Spencer fall asleep in the Elm Street house and get stuck in nightmares. For Carlos, he gets stuck in this nightmare where Freddy basically plays on his hearing impairment by cutting off his ear and then bewitching his hearing aid, where sounds are magnified to where by him scratching his claws on a chalkboard makes his head explode. For Spencer, because of his obsession with video games, Freddy traps him within the world of a video game where he gets beat up to eventually to the point of falling into this chasm. Uh, Eventually, Freddy does go after John Doe, who he eventually admits John Doe thinks that Freddy's his father. And Freddy says to him, "No, I am not your father, but I needed you to go bring my daughter back, Maggie, who will free him from who's supposed to free him from Springwood." So what eventually happens is he kills John Doe by impaling him on a bed of nails from falling from the sky like a Looney Tunes cartoon. And then Freddy eventually meets Maggie in her dream, and he explains to her that you're my blood and you're the only one that could bring me out of Springwood, and now that I'm out of Springwood, I can go and terrorize other towns and go after their children. So eventually, Freddy goes also after Tracy and traumatizes her about her abusive father, and then he introduces himself to Doc, Yaphet Kotto's character, who he tells him that he'll live forever no matter what people do to him. He even goes through how how the teens in previous films tried to kill him and it never worked. But what Doc does is he pulls a piece of Freddy's sweater off and comes into the real world. So they figure out, of course, if Freddy comes into the real world, he can be killed. And they eventually, through Maggie and Doc and Tracy, they bring him into the real world. They basically blow him up, and supposedly he's supposed to die. The film ends with with the credits rolling, and on the side of the screen, an homage of all the major Freddy scenes throughout the previous films, Nightmares 1 through 5. So that was where the series was supposed to end. Overall feel for this film. Overall, I really always enjoyed this installment in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. I know it's gotten a lot of flack over the years because they turned basically Freddy Krueger into a fun guy, and this movie plays like a Looney Tune cartoon. But I actually always enjoyed it, and I always found the visual look of the film rather interesting. I like how they utilized a lot of elements of pop culture into it to give Freddy's look and his detail and story. Specifically, when he kills Spencer, he turns his glove, into the power glove that you would see at the time for the old Nintendo system. The Power Glove was a device that Nintendo players could supposedly use to operate Nintendo video games, the original NES system. In terms of the cinematic depiction, I liked how the town of Springwood looked. I liked how they brought back the old Elm Street house, and I also liked how they looked at the boiler room throughout the various nightmares. It just really looked good. In fact, one of the other things that really helped for people to understand this film is New Line created a rationale as to why Freddy keeps coming back. And he says in the film, tells Yaphet Kotto's character, Doc, they're dream people, these ancient dream demons gave me the job to invade people's dreams. So, and the fact that it's being told by Yaphet Kotto and Yaphet Kotto is discussing almost gave credibility to it, even though that had never been mentioned before in any of the previous Nightmare on Elm Street films. In terms of Freddy's depiction, that's like a yin and yang, because I like the idea that they turn Freddy into a fun guy, as I said, by giving him these comical one-liners whenever he would kill somebody. And we did see this in previous Nightmare films. Some people say they go over the top in this version in Freddy's Dead with the way he kills the John Doe character, with the video game puns of saying neat graphics and now I'm playing with power. But overall, I always did like how he was portrayed here. My only couple of reservations regarding it is the makeup I felt was okay here. I felt like the way they portrayed his burns this time almost had him aged to where he looked like an older Freddy Krueger. Maybe that was intentional, but my favorite makeups have always been from part 3 and part 4 because I felt that's where it looked just right and creepy. Here I felt Freddy was, yes, a burn victim, but it wasn't one of my favorites. The other issue I have with his depiction is the fedora. The fedora in this film is much larger than it is in the other films, cleaner, and it also has that fabric piece that sometimes you'll see on fedoras. It almost has like a bow on the side. I felt like, well, we've never seen that before on any of his hats. Why are we just seeing that now? And I only noticed that a few years ago, when I was viewing the film. One of the other aspects in terms of when this film came out in 1991, the film was marketed as being what's called 3D, three-dimensional. Now, obviously, in today's day and age, it's very common to go into a movie theater and see a 3D film. But back in 1991, that was not a typical thing you would see. You may see some places that have it, but not really. So what was supposed to be was, at the end of the film, there's the climactic battle where Maggie goes into her dream to pull Freddy out and kill him. Doc says to her to use these glasses. These are the actual ones. And the interesting thing was, it says here, these glasses were given to theater goers who went to see Freddy vs. Jason in 1991. In fact, if you look, you can actually see the Freddy's Dead logo here. And it says on the back, let me see if I can even get it. It says, well, not the Hulk Hogan part because that was my marketing Suburban Commando that was coming out. It basically said to put these glasses on when Maggie puts hers on in the film. And basically you would be able to get a 3D view of the climactic ending of Freddy's Dead. Now, in one of the DVD commentaries called The House That Freddy's Built, which was part of the Nightmare on Elm Street 2010 DVD release, they said that they did the test, they didn't really see the 3D effect, and they said, well, maybe the technology wasn't up to where it was. But hey, the idea was cool from when we would go into Freddy's brain and see the dream demons. So maybe if they ever remaster it, maybe it'll look better in the future. It actually was referred to, instead of 3D, they call it actually Freddy Vision. But it's just one of these cool things. These glasses I actually was able to acquire a couple of years ago at the Monster Mania convention held in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. Someone had a bucket load of the Freddy's Dead 3D glasses, so I just made sure to add that to my collection. One of the other things that this film, Freddy's Dead, is known for is the amount of cameos that take place in it, specifically from various people. I mean, at a certain point, Roseanne Barr and Tom Arnold, who was her husband at the time, appear in the film. We also see Bob Shea at the beginning of the film. As I said, he was one of the top guy. He's one of the top guys at New Line Cinema. Johnny Depp also makes a cameo in this film during a PSA announcement about what drugs do to your brain by comparing it to a fried egg. And the reason why it's so interesting that he's in this film is because, for those of you who are not aware, Johnny Depp was in the original Nightmare on Elm Street film. That was his first breakthrough role in film. We also see a scene of Alice Cooper in the film. Alice Cooper, was always a fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street series. And what they did, very interesting, was there's a series of scenes where Maggie sees Freddy's memories. And there's a period where young Freddy is living with this man that is physically abusing him. So they had the abusive stepfather played by Alice Cooper. And that I was like, hey, this is great to actually see someone of that type of rock star in this series, especially since, as I said, he's always been a major fan. Um, One of the other individuals that is very interesting here, and I didn't realize this connection until about 10 years ago. The character of Carlos is played by an individual named Ricky Dean Logan. For those of you who have ever seen Back to the Future Part 2, he was the individual in Griff Tannen in 2015 in his gang that has that electronic piece on his chest that makes the chicken noises. Uh, so he played. It was very interesting that he was also in this film too. So over 30 years later, the Nightmare on Elm Street series, still resonates with people as one of their fan favorite in terms of fan favorites of horror franchises, and we have to wonder, well, what does this film leave us with a legacy of? Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, there has been a plethora over the last 30 something years, more than 30 years, maybe even since '84, of Freddy Krueger Nightmare on Elm Street merchandise, including recreations of Freddy in action figure form and collectible form. And one of the collector companies, NECA, NECA, has done a great job in releasing Nightmare on Elm Street collectibles, including Freddy statues and role play items, including several versions of Freddy's glove with real blades that are dull, but full of that are completely made of metal, including metal rivets and metal claws. And in addition to collectibles, there has also been comic book series made by various comic book companies, including Innovation. New Line, I believe, marketed one of theirs with their own type of comic book version. Even the Freddy's Dead comic book film had a comic book adaptation to it. Um, in a recent interview with Robert Englund, the individual who has portrayed Freddy Krueger in all 8 Nightmare films, including Freddy vs. Jason, except the reboot, of course, because Jackie Earle Haley played him there. Robert Englund was interviewed, and one of the things they asked him regarding the 30th anniversary of Freddy's Dead is that he's proud that Freddy is considered he referred to as an equal opportunity killer by bringing to attention someone that has a hearing impairment. Now, obviously, that's a very interesting statement, but you know what? There's very interesting truth into that. Really, as I said, I've always enjoyed the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Would I say this is my favorite of the series? No. My favorite has always been Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors, but this has always been a great addition since I saw it as a child. So, if for those of you who have never seen the Nightmare on Elm Street series, I would encourage you to view them. If you've never seen Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, I would also encourage you to view that film. As always, thank you so much for joining. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe to Larry's Batcave. And as always, please make sure you tune in to our next broadcast. Thank you so much. Have a great week.